Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to speak about America. I'll give you my thoughts on America, the America I know, and what's happening to that country now. I first landed on American soil in 1983 at the age of 33 and instantly fell in love with the country. It was, allow me to say, a case of love at first sight. I spent nearly 4 years in a small university town in Ohio with my wife and son, studying for my doctorate in history as well as teaching. The more I saw of the country and its people and came into contact with its high educational standards, work ethic, friendly and compassionate people, sports and recreational facilities, and its rich social life, the more my fascination grew. My wife and I made friends, many friends. In 2 road trips, we traveled from the east coast to the west coast of this vast country. I visited the US for short periods a few more times since then, including as recently as in January last year. On one such trip, my wife and I drove about 10,000 kilometers through 20 states. The more I saw, the more I understood why much of the rest of the world is captivated by America. The beauty and bounty of the land matched by the opportunities it offers its people. Why, given a chance, tens of millions of people from all around the world would like to make the United States their home. People the world over admire America for what it offers its people, not only to its citizens, but also to new arrivals. Whether they come as students, skilled migrants, green card holders, or mere refugees fleeing persecution in their own countries, or seeking a better life for themselves and their children. The United States was a very big country with an even bigger heart, a rich land willing to let all who reached its shores to benefit from its riches. The United States paid more than its fair share to international organizations such as the United Nations and its various agencies and other international organizations such as the Colombo Plan, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, Asian Development Bank, and it provided more financial aid to poorer countries across the globe than the rest of the world combined. The United States championed human rights abroad, was at the forefront to help spread education, improve health, and protect minorities and women's rights all around the world. But while it was easy to admire the achievements of the United States as a country and to benefit from its multi-layered, multifarious assistance to other countries, it was always hard not to question some of its actions abroad. While championing human rights, the US was often in alliance with dictatorial regimes. Even worse, it sometimes conspired to overthrow democratically elected governments in favor of dictators or autocrats who better served its interests at the time. The ousting of Salvador Allende in Chile is one example. But, but by far the least comprehensible has been Washington's unquestioned, ironclad support for Israel's apartheid regime. Its numerous acts of discrimination and oppression of the Palestinian people, usurpation of Palestinian land, and aggression against its Arab neighbors. Such is America's subservience to Israel that while it is still possible to burn the US flag publicly in an American city without being arrested, burning an Israeli flag is sure to land one in an American jail. But I will return to this in a moment. The US involvement in the Vietnam War in the 1960s was perhaps understandable from the perspective of the Cold War. Some might even condone its aggression in Afghanistan in 2001 in light of 9/11, Al-Qaeda, and Osama bin Laden, but nothing whatsoever justified the invasion of Iraq in 2003, which ultimately led to the death of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, not to mention 4,500 American soldiers. It looked bad at the time and appears to be criminal with hindsight. Outside of the United States, I was among very few in the world who initially supported the US invasion of Iraq. I had hoped that this would rid the country of a brutal dictator and liberate the people of Iraq, but it was soon obvious that there was more to the invasion than met the eye. Regime change in Iraq was pushed by a bunch of neocons driven by Islamophobia and the Zionist lobby, both American and Israeli. I am personally guilty of condoning this naked and utterly unwarranted American aggression because I was blinded by my hatred of Saddam Hussein and his brutal dictatorship. I had wrongly and rather naively hoped that the overthrow of the despotic regime by American military might would be good for the Iraqi people. It was, and then it wasn't. But that was then. The transformation of the United States in the last few years has been nothing short of horrible. Its fall from grace in the eyes of the world has been spectacular. If the US can no longer count me among its admirers, it says a lot about how much the country I knew and admired, despite its failings, particularly in its many military interventions abroad, has drastically changed. Donald Trump, who 15 years ago would have been regarded as not fit for public office in any Western democracy, has been elected president for a second term. This after the country had been through its first 4 years as president and then 4 more years after an election defeat which he refused to accept. Not only that, he stirred up a mini rebellion to stay in power. Thankfully, his own loyal vice president refused to do his bidding. Trump left the White House screaming, kicking, and crying foul. But instead of landing in jail, Trump triumphantly returned to the White House on a platform of false promises, factual distortions, outright lies, and vicious personal attacks. Those who now voted for him in even greater numbers than the first time cannot claim that they had not been warned. I totally understand the American people's concern about the loss of jobs and the rise in the cost of living. Also, the issue of mass influx across the southern border in recent times was such as to raise alarm in any country. No country, not the United States, not the UK, not Germany, not France, no country can take in all the world's poor, persecuted, and dispossessed. An open door policy is simply untenable, economically and logistically, but also culturally. Political correctness in America was also somehow or somewhat out of control, but these issues should not and must not be used to promote xenophobia, certainly not from the White House, by blaming all crimes on immigrants and describing all immigrants as actual or potential criminals. This is neither morally correct nor factually correct. Control your borders by all means. Decide who comes in and who doesn't, based on merit, not race, religion, or ethnicity. But for God's sake, do not dehumanize immigrants or people of color. For decades, the American people have been horrified by street crime, gang violence, and the proliferation of assault weapons in the country. All previous administrations stand guilty of doing little about it, but President Trump has harnessed these concerns to his political agenda, blaming crime on his political and ideological opponents and on race, rather than work on better policing and stricter gun control laws. The signs have not been good for America and for Americans for some time now. All administrations and all political persuasions have to share the blame, but it is now well past the time for blame games. The country is on the brink of spinning out of control, what with Trump's bizarre tariffs, his dismantling of alliances, demonization of immigrants, his polarizing rhetoric, and the abundance of assault weapons in the country. The president has a tendency to hijack every issue, from street crime to grocery prices to border control, for his narrow political ends, denouncing his critics and opponents as unpatriotic and hostile to their own country. If things are not rectified soon, disaster awaits, to the glee of foes and grief of friends. And finally, the Trump administration's blank check to Israel to finish the business, in his own words, in Gaza, knowing full well that this will cause death and destruction on an unimaginable scale in that tiny enclave, lead to its ethnic cleansing, and ultimately to the expulsion of most or all of the Palestinians from their own homeland. It is hard to believe, but the American president himself spoke of emptying Gaza of its people so that he could build a Riviera there. It is obvious to all that Israel would not have been able to do what it has done thus far without the connivance as well as the military, financial, political, and diplomatic support of the United States. US support for Israel is nothing new. However, the previous administrations, both Democratic and Republican, tried to maintain a semblance of impartiality, however feeble, but the highest ranking officials of the Trump administration are openly supportive of the worst deeds of the Netanyahu regime, many of whose senior members openly use genocidal language against Palestinians. The Trump appointed US ambassador to Israel appears more Zionist than the worst Israeli Zionists themselves. He even refuses to acknowledge the existence of any entity by the name of Palestine or any people called Palestinian. If Israel now believes that its goal of the final solution of the Palestinian issue is achievable through violence, war, and ethnic cleansing, it is to a very, very large part due to America's unconditional support. That this is happening before our very eyes in the third decade of the 21st century is truly astonishing. The memory of the Nakba of 1948-49, whereby hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were expelled from their ancestral homes through violence, terror, and murder and turned into refugees, has barely faded. And now there's open talk of what will be a second Nakba. Many of those who are now on the verge of expulsion from Gaza are the children and grandchildren of those Palestinians who had been violently chased out of their homes during the first Nakba. In the last 2 years alone, the US has vetoed 5 UN Security Council draft resolutions calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Cumulatively, since 1970, when it did so for the first time, the US has used its veto to protect Israel for a total of 50 times. America's international image and stature may be declining more rapidly than even its worst enemies could wish for. President Trump has done much to hasten the decline. He will be gone in less than 4 years, but the damage he and his team have done to America's body politic and to its standing in the world is incalculable and irreparable. I do hope that when there is a change of administration in Washington in less than 4 years, the Trump era will be remembered for what it is, a shame on a great nation. Thank you.